The Ace Pro was launched in November 2023. After watching countless reviews focusing exclusively on the positives, I decided to buy one and find out where it falls short. Here's what I found after using the camera for a month. Hopefully, it will help you make a more informed purchase. Part 1 of 3. Overall, the build quality feels great. It feels tough and reassuring to hold. That being said, here are some things I noticed. The port covers have grippy protrusions, which can easily be mistaken for buttons, and it doesn't take too much of a slide to open them. Though they probably are secure enough for normal use, I do worry that they might be accidentally slid open during a firm grasp whilst wearing gloves, or by brushing up against it while wearing neoprene scuba gear. If you're nervous, you can just use one of the case's Insta360 cells for use around water. Speaking of water, the dive case is rated to a depth of 60 meters. And it comes with anti-fog inserts and optional anti-slip rings. The floaty case floats, as expected, and is bright orange to make it easier to find should it fall overboard. The Ace Pro itself is waterproof up to 10 meters without any case at all, and there are instructions under the screen on how to care for the camera after submerging in salt water. Very handy. Back to those port covers, one in particular seems like it wants to pop off when disconnecting a USB-C cable. It's clearly designed to be removable, but it's attached with thin plastic that feels like it's going to need to be replaced at some point. Luckily, Insta360 sells spares, and they're not expensive. And despite feeling like the flimsiest part of construction, it did actually hold up well to repeated testing. The microSD card slot is annoying as the card is hard to remove without any tools. I've only replaced the card 3 times so far, and already there are some scratches around it, chronicling my frustration. What's more is that after wetting the camera, the underside of the port cover seemed wet. I don't think any water would have leaked inside, as there's a rubber ring sealing it. It's probably just some residual water from the edges that got pushed around while sliding the port cover open. Best to be mindful of that, though. Meanwhile, the flippy screen, which at first I thought would be quite fragile, actually seems remarkably sturdy. You need to press the side buttons to unlock it, and the hinge is stiff enough so that you can rest it at any angle up to 180 degrees where it snaps into place. But those release buttons I mentioned can be tricky to press while using the L plate, and it takes 2 hands to flip the screen, so if you plan to regularly pan back and forth between yourself and a friend, you may well wish you had a more common 2-screen setup. Here you can see the connecting data cable, and although it doesn't seem like a practical weak point, I suppose technically it is one. And though it's hard to depict on video, I'm pleased to say the brightness and resolution of the screen are both excellent. More on the screen later though. I am a little nervous about scratching the screen and lens. Though I've never scratched either on any action cameras I've ever owned, the fact that the screen is so big and the lens cover is not user-changeable does stand out. Aftermarket options such as screen protectors, lens covers, and cases would be a good insurance policy against damage, and Insta360 promise a free lens replacement in the first year if you get really unlucky, but it's something you should know before buying. The selfie stick has a really nice built-in tripod stand. I think the lock nuts would struggle to support a camera this heavy being flung around enthusiastically whilst the articulating arms are extended, so don't expect a perfect hold. The hand grip is also quite thick, so you might struggle to hold it securely if you have smaller hands. I won't go over every setting in the menu system. Suffice it to say this is the most responsive and intuitive action camera I've ever used. It's not a million miles different from what other manufacturers do, but somehow it lands better in my hands. Magnetic mount. When I first saw it, I was horrified at the idea of a magnetic mount. Surely that won't hold my expensive camera securely, will it? As it turns out, it's actually a mechanical latch. The magnets just guide the locking mechanism into place. A couple of things about this. 1. The orientation matters. You need to mount the camera such that it matches this icon, otherwise the magnets will repel, which is weird because the latch itself is bidirectional. 2. The magnetic guides don't always help you as much as perhaps they should. They always seem to get me close, but not quite there, and it requires some further fiddling. The mechanical latch is a bit quirky too, as it's easy to think you've secured the camera when really you haven't. But when you do secure it, it really is very sturdy, and you'll struggle to get it off without squeezing the release buttons. You'll probably want to pick up several of these mounts, maybe one for each place you plan to attach the camera. Otherwise, you'll end up using the thumb screw, which negates the benefit. I mention this because it can easily add another £50 or £100 to the price. But before you go off and do that, consider this third-party one I bought. It's a metal construction, has both the prongs and a 1/4 inch thread, and the magnets are much stronger. The camera always glides securely into place even from a distance, and just listen to that reassuring snap. It's much better than the official mount, and cheaper too. Startup time. Startup time matters a lot because the best way to extend battery life is to keep the camera off until it's needed. But that only works if you can start recording quickly when the action happens. From off to standby only took 2.25 seconds, which is quite good. But there's a setting which lets you power on directly into recording mode. In this case, the startup time was just over 2.5 seconds. Unfortunately, I noticed that there was also a varying delay of up to 1 second before the audio was recorded, so really the startup time is around 3.5 seconds. Also worth noting is that there is a pre-record setting, but this doesn't work from a cold start and does drain the battery if you leave it on a lot. It's still a great feature to have, but in the real world it's more aligned to saving memory than saving battery. Stabilisation. Here is some footage taken while walking, showing what each level of stabilisation can do. Clearly, the stabilisation on this camera is fantastic. Now, here is some footage taken whilst running. All the stabilisation you see here is baked directly into the video file, so you can import it in Final Cut Pro and start working on it right away. However, for maximum flexibility, you could record in free-frame mode, which captures the pictures from the full area of the sensor and also stores the gyro data. Whilst the video file itself is not stabilized right out of the camera, you can process it through the studio software quite easily to deliver incredible results, much better than would otherwise be possible from analyzing the pixel motion alone. Just look how smooth this footage has become. Now, in this case, the source footage was extremely shaky and the end result is buttery smooth, but notice how much of a toll this process has taken on both the crop and resolution. And if you're wondering just how far you can push this, the software includes an option for 360-degree stabilization, which means that even if the camera spins upside down, the frame will remain upright. That's a heck of a party trick. Laggy screen. While using the Ace Pro, I felt the screen to be lagging more than expected, possibly with over a second of delay. That seemed more than I expected, so I recorded it in action. Even after I experimented with different resolutions, frame rates, and stabilization modes, this was as bad as I could make it behave on camera. Personally, I can't fault this. Rolling shutter. Rolling shutter is barely perceptible in 1080 and 4K at 50 frames per second. 8K 24 is pretty bad, but I doubt anyone is seriously shooting 8K with this camera. Minimum focus distance. The minimum focus distance was called into question by a couple of reviews. They showed that the camera was better at focusing on the background rather than the subject. Even Ace Pro's website claims a minimum focus distance of 40 centimeters, which is more than the GoPro Hero 12, but the same as the Osmo Action 4. Here is a test I shot at various distances. Personally, I'd agree that 40 centimeters is the minimum focus distance, and ideally you'd keep a distance of at least 60 centimeters. The truth is, I do wish this was better, if only because I tend to watch my recorded footage back on a large computer monitor. Mic modes. There are 3 mic modes: stereo, wind reduction, and direction focus. Stereo and directional modes work well.
This is what stereo audio sounds like. This is what directional audio sounds like.
But wind reduction didn't impress me in my limited testing.
This is what wind reduction audio sounds like.
It didn't do nearly enough to cut out the wind buffeting, and I felt it left my voice sounding a bit over-processed. If I was serious about audio, especially in a windy setting, I know I'd rather carry a wireless lav mic with a windscreen attached. Polarized screen. The screen is polarized, so although it looks fine to the naked eye, you will not be able to see it at all in the horizontal orientation if you're wearing polarized sunglasses. This is a hardware issue which the industry moved past years ago. Just think of your mobile phone. But for some reason, Insta360 thought this was a sensible place to cut costs. It simply cannot be excused on a device designed primarily for outdoor usage. If you want to use the camera while wearing polarized glasses, you might be wondering what would happen if you use the L mount to orient the camera vertically. In combination with free-frame video, perhaps you could get usable horizontal footage by way of cropping in during post. Well, I tried that, and technically it works, but it's a poor solution for the following reasons. 1. Since free-frame footage is not stabilized in camera, now you have to integrate the Studio app into your workflow. 2. You'll need to store, transfer, and process more pixels. 3. The resulting footage would be lower than 4K resolution. But most of all, 4. You are using a vertical screen to preview a horizontal frame, thus negating the benefits of having such a large screen in the first place. This is disappointing, maybe even the first deal breaker. Sharpness. Let's take a look at the image sharpness. What you're looking at here is the lowest level of sharpness. Now you're looking at the highest level of sharpness, which, to my eyes, looks like the sort of quality you could have expected 10 years ago. For some reason, the default setting is highest, and I was very disappointed to realize I had ended up with completely unusable footage from my first day of shooting. Since it looks crisp on the tiny LCD screen, you wouldn't notice it's a problem until after you get back home and view it on a computer monitor, which makes it especially frustrating. Whilst the low setting may look a little soft, and medium may also be an acceptable option, it seems to me that you're better off shooting with the lowest setting and adding any desired sharpness back in post, where you have far greater control. That's all for part 1 of the review. Be sure to subscribe if you want to be alerted when part 2 is uploaded.